if you look further into the future and imagine the development of nanotechnology and its military uses, you can see a further ramping up of that same process.
Oh yeah. Or, you know, in some of the bioengineering that we're doing of living systems, we may produce a beastie that feeds on all carbon life. And silicon life may get us after all. That these are, you know, all this new discovery in the genome and clone without serious risk. Because we're really tampering here with a life force that got us through thousands of years of evolution. And what we think may be an improvement may in turn sow the seeds of our own demise, and maybe the cockroaches will survive. So it's going to require, I think, today, individuals like yourself and Swinburne, who's doing some extraordinary work in futures and in the integration of a lot of these new systems. It's really going to take people like yourself and your students and others to begin to understand these dynamics at levels that make possible their dissemination to a wider world. Because the crisis that I think that we will encounter, some great singularity, will happen like all of a sudden. And to an extent to which we are prepared to recognize this complexity and have already experimented and field tested the models of complexity that can handle it. That's really what we need to be doing right now, because my own sense of future is that singularity is pretty close. Now, I'm not a doom and gloom guy at all.
Sure.
But I'm realistic enough to read the signs and see where trend lines are pointing, and realize when you have billions of people left behind in technology, in healthcare, in education, in economic advantage, and quality of life, and they see that they're left behind, and demagogues appear to rally them, then we're in for a pretty difficult time. And we thought the end of the Cold War would bring bliss and happiness and peace, and lo and behold, I think it's just probably humans have the big brain. And one thing Claire Graves said in Dallas when I had it on television one time, the interviewer said, "Dr. Graves, will humans ever find true happiness?" He cleared his throat. I knew what was coming. He said, "Sir, if we ever found true happiness, we'll be looking for the first cliff to jump off of." He says, "That's chasing the will of the wisp, simply because we have a big brain, and this big brain has seen a built-in wanderlust. We can't stand boredom. And so we're constantly searching for the new, the different. And this seems to be our destiny. And if we can find ways to focus that creative energy on constructive outputs, as opposed to becoming the servant of some of the more nefarious, darker, sinister sides of us, in terms of the kinds of villains that we need a James Bond to rescue us from, then maybe we have a chance to make it beyond the 21st century."
Far from being a period of boredom, one could picture this time as a kind of evolutionary forcing ground to really get us to get our act together as soon as possible. But that seems to be quite a tall order given the complexity of the problem. So we really, in a sense, do seem to be in a bit of a race here.
Oh, I think so. And Y2K, I think, was a rehearsal for September 11. And it takes the September 11s and other kind of crises to get our attention, to give us wake-up calls, to show us that we become complacent, thinking that we have solved our problems without realizing we've also sown the seeds of new ones to be created, and with the possibility of wild cards that can come from a different number of different sources. I'm not sure how resilient we are today. And so I just, as you say, this is a major time for serious contemplation and preparation. And I just hope that after September 11 in my country, you know, rather than think just in terms of terrorism and protection and tightening and law enforcement actions, we'd use that opportunity and that energy and that fear to say, well, how do we make communities healthy? And That was not done in my country, in spite of the fact that we had a lot of chips to spend with other countries. That we didn't go down that track. I think that we'll look back at it and say, well, maybe the White House did what it could, given its own level of development, but also wish that we had jointly focused on some of these topics, and so we spent less money in police and security operations and more in building healthy systems, healthy immune systems, where we wouldn't need so much legal protection and security apparatus. But that just wasn't in the cards, but maybe it's not too late for us to begin to think about that.
Ken talks about the Prime Directive as being the health of the entire spiral. That would seem to be possibly a major key as we look at it.
That's why I'm a spirocrat, I guess. I believe in spirocracy. And if we keep the spiral healthy and the various expressions along the spiral in such a way that they meet the needs of people at that level, don't become malignant, and keep the spiral open for movement, then that seems to be what can become a driving force as a model beyond the United Nations. It's what I call the sovereign spiral. And so if we look at it as the power of the third wind, as a touchstone, as a way to make critical decisions, will it serve the interest of the spiral? And we ask ourselves the question, what are the intelligences in the spiral itself? What is it in human nature that creates new systems that transcend but include and transcend but anticipate? So if we can get closer to how nature does these things, and rather than trying to be counter to nature, or try to engineer people, we simply build these natural evolutionary habitats. Like we learned in Africa, you don't preserve elephant herds by focusing on elephants, but by preserving the habitat of elephantness. And if we can begin to think that way about human societies and how they emerge through steps and stages, and spend our resources in the facilitation of those natural movements, then we spend far less money worrying about peace and conflict, because we've opened the natural channels of humans as they emerge through levels. That's really the dream that Ken and I had. Obviously, the reason for the whole Integral Institute movement in all the different branches, from healthcare to psychology to technology to music and the arts to the environment, to all those things, is simply the next set of knowledge about humans that I think will begin to emerge at university levels, because it's so clear to us that we can no longer sustain even academic topics where we have the various disciplines as silos separate from each other. And even now, you know, we form hybrids of various things, and there's psychohistory, and there's anthropological history. I mean, all these different names that we're doing as hybrids is a transition stage to recognize that even these so-called disciplines that we thought were separate were not at all. It's all integrated, which again, it's what the integral movement means.
It's part of the genius of the whole integral idea, is to see where all these contributions fit together.
Yes.
So as a way of finishing off, thinking more in terms of practice and embodiment in actual places and people and work, what's your sense of where SDI is at in 2004? How do you see it developing over the next 2 or 3 years?
It's attracting a rather large constellation, is the term that I use. And with each of our major confabs, we're getting more and more rich assortment of people, not just from various countries and cultures, but also from various domains, who have heard about it and who are seeing in our quadrants and levels and lines how knowledge is a function of the interaction of all these things. And I'm noticing that we're becoming more and more popular in political circles and in top management circles. And it's simply a matter of time. One thing, Richard, that Claire Graves kept teaching me, she said, Don, you cannot market this idea. You can't sell it. Either there's a state of readiness for it, or there isn't. So don't waste your time trying to knock on doors. People cannot be until they are. I never knew quite what that means, but I used to say it. Or all you can do is help a country become what's next for it to become. So the idea of idealistic utopian visions that we lay on top of people is simply not on. So as life conditions worsen, as solutions from the past fail to meet the needs of the present, then the prediction is windows start to open, for new ways of thinking. And more and more I'm sensing that this is exactly where we're headed today. So there's, for the first time, a note of rare optimism in me that, as one of my, I guess, classic saying is, no more prizes for forecasting the rain, only prizes for building the ark.
On that optimistic note, I just want to say thank you very much for visiting with us in Melbourne.
Thank you. I'm
All
honored
the
to be
best.
here.
Thank you.